editor there and had a contract. And then everybody left that magazine and went to another magazine called Premiere, which was a film magazine. And those of us who weren't at the top of the masthead, meaning the people, editor-in-chief, senior editor, that kind of thing, had to kind of prove ourselves to the next one, Premiere, before we could get contracted. So she called me in March of 1999 and said, I got a story for you, it'll get you back on staff here. And it was a typical 3-month assignment. And I said, what is it? She said, well, it's about the Manson murders. And I was like, oh, come on, wasn't that been written to death? And I wasn't trying to be ironic or anything. I said, why? And she said, well, the 30th anniversary is coming up in August. And I said, what can I say about it that hasn't been said in a million books and articles? And I said, and I've never even read Helter Skelter, I'm just not interested.
Right.
And she said, does that mean?
No, that's a boat, a giant boat.
Anyway, should I wait for it to stop or is it?
Okay, stop. There's your.
That's a joke. So, and she said, now just are having this conversation, she said, be aware after this phone call how often you hear his name invoked by people on the street, on the news, and other books when they talk about evil, like unrestrained horror and evil. He's a reference point, a cultural reference point. I'm like, I don't think so. And she goes, I said, well, what will the angle be besides 30 years after? And she said, oh, maybe how it changed Hollywood or how it impacted the industry or something. And I said, that sounds really boring. And she said, you'll find an angle. And she knew me really well at that point. And I had started at the other magazine. I wrote a piece that was an investigative piece about the industry. I can't remember which one was the first one, but after that they created a monthly investigative series, and I did one like every 3 months, and she knew that however it began, it always ended differently, when you dig into this stuff. And she said, I know you'll find something really interesting. So I kind of reluctantly agreed to do it, thinking, 3 months and then on to something else. And little did I know it was going to take me 20 years and almost destroy my life. So it wasn't anything I planned to do or really wanted to do. And I still question whether it was worth it all, I think, honestly. But the easiest thing to do is just say, well, actually, I think it's fine. I thought it was behind me when it came out, but now I'm working on a follow-up kind of sequel to it where I'm answering what I wasn't able to answer in the first.
Yeah, and so obviously the piece for Premiere didn't.
That's that part of the story. So I guess I'll try to keep it brief. The first thing I did was read Helter Skelter, and I thought it was an amazing book. I mean, it was terrifying and really well written and presented. And I reached out to Vincent Bugliosi, who was the author of Helter Skelter, which, if you believe him, and I don't about most stuff now, but about this, I think it is true. It's the best true crime selling book of all time. And I reached out to him for an interview, and he hadn't done a lot of interviews on it for a while. He prosecuted the case and became very famous and, I don't know about wealthy, but he made a lot of money off of it. And then after having a failed career in politics, he ran for office and lost 2 or 3 races. He started writing books, mostly true crime books, where he would cover cases or even cases he worked in when he went into private criminal defense. And most of them were bestsellers. And during that period, the newspapers in LA and a lot of places were reporting that the cops believed it was a drug burn, a drug deal gone wrong, things like that. Nobody had any idea that it was a hippie commune that had until most recently been at the Spawn Ranch that had migrated out to this even more remote ranch in Death Valley, had committed the murders until Ed Davis, the chief of LAPD, held a press conference to announce that they had solved the murders. And the people who were at the press conference said there was a gasp when he said it was a hippie who called himself Jesus and the devil, named Charlie, he didn't say his last name, who had I think they had 4 or 5 of them in custody, and they were still trying to find 2. And they were committed on his command. And within a day or two, you know, they identified everyone, and the newspapers had pictures of Manson women who were mostly under the age of 23, 24, some of them 13, 14 years old, you know, cradling babies, suckling at the breast, and, you know, flowers in their hair, just saying, we love Charlie, and we do what Charlie says. And all of a sudden, I mean, I was only 10 then, but from what, you know, the official history tells us is people wouldn't pick up hitchhikers anymore. It terrified the, you know, the United States and beyond, that all of a sudden hippies went from harmless people seeking free love and drugs and peace, silly, whatever, to killers who were going to come into your house and slaughter you and write blood messages on the walls, which was exactly the objective of Chaos and COINTELPRO, which was to make you fear what Lyndon Johnson, who was president at the time, Ronald Reagan, who was governor of California, J. Edgar Hoover was the head of the FBI, and the CIA decided was the greatest threat to national security was this growing youth movement who was protesting the escalating Vietnam War and the Black Panthers and the Black Militant movement, and they were going to do anything they could to stop that and neutralize them, as they say in their documents.
Yeah, yeah, that's very wild.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the La Biancas, so I feel like there's kind of a lack of attention on.
Oh, that's like a kick in my gut, because you're so right. I don't have a lot about them in the book.
Yeah.
Mostly because there was so much information that I hadn't finished reporting, and it sounds like a cop-out, but a lot of people don't notice that. But that there's not that much about them in my book. And it's something, and I'm not doing this to tout the second book. It's probably gonna be another 20 years. So don't wait. But I definitely know that the Manson family knew who Nino and Rosemary were, and they knew who they were, and everything we were told about that was a lie. I didn't have all the pieces in place. I really, really strove so hard not to put anything in the book that I couldn't back up. And you know, one of the battles, it wasn't even a battle, because my publisher immediately said, you're right, we'll do it, was they initially told me I was going to have 10 pages for my endnotes, which is where you put all your sourcing in. I said, no, that's the most important part of the book, because I don't want people not to have access to the information I have. So I tell them where the files are, and I ended up getting 60 or 65 pages. And that's a bad thing if you get the audio book. And I was going to ask the publisher if they can somehow make the endnotes available online. I guess I could just probably scan them all and do it myself. But the other thing is, if you have the print version of the book, there's an index, which is great and thorough, but it doesn't cover the endnotes. So I get messages and emails from people all the time, why didn't you write about this person? But they're in the endnotes. Yeah. And that's another thing I want the next version of the book to do, is index the endnotes.
Yeah, a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you, I guess, what's from your perspective, what's one of the most shocking things that you found?
Another course-changing part of the reporting was, so I met this crazy FBI guy that people in the conspiracy world might know. His name's, he's dead. Ted Gunderson, has anybody in this room heard of him? And I had lunch, I went to see him. He was an ex-FBI guy who made all the similar allegations that I was in the future gonna make. I went to see him present something, and I thought, oh my God, he's so fucking crazy, but I was supposed to take him to dinner after, and I took him to dinner. And to this day, I still don't know what his role was. He spread a lot of disinformation, but he was right about a lot of stuff. But he was the first one to mention a psychiatrist named Jolly West, Louis Jolyon West. He said he was at the Haight-Ashbury Free Medical Clinic. He was a central figure in MK Ultra. Look into him. And I had it in my notes, I didn't record him, and I didn't look into anything he told me that day. But then I started hearing about this guy from other people in the Haight area. And I looked him up and I saw that he was a very prominent psychiatrist who was a brainwashing expert, who had achieved his first recognition in the 1950s when US pilots fighting in the Korean War who were captured in Korea had been brainwashed to say that they had been using biological weapons on the population, which is a war crime. And it shocked the world that these pilots were all of a sudden, pledging allegiance to what had become North Korea and China and Russia. And when we were able to get them back to the United States, they were immediately put under the care of this psychiatrist and 3 or 4 of his colleagues. And they deprogrammed them and got them to say we were brainwashed by our captors, and that didn't happen. In reality, that did happen. They were telling the truth. That's a whole other story. But those same psychiatrists then followed this. They all ended up working in MK. MK Ultra was created by the CIA in 48 or 49. It was called Artichoke and Bluebird first, before it became MK Ultra in like 52, to combat what they believed was the Russian and Chinese technology to brainwash people. They did believe that it was done, and it was done, and they thought we're going to have to figure out what they're doing and how they're doing it to prevent them from doing it to us if our people are captured again. So it began as a defensive operation, and then immediately when they saw what you could do with it, it became an offensive operation where they're like, we're going to create people who we can get to go kill other people and not have any understanding that they were programmed to do it. So Jolly West was at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas until '56, and then he went to the University of Oklahoma where he began their neuroscience department and chaired the psychiatry department. Then he went out to the Haight in 66 to the end of 67 on sabbatical to study hippies. And then he went to UCLA and chaired their psychiatry department and neuroscience until he retired in it was the early 90s. And in 1975 to 77, when MK Ultra got exposed, his name was on the front page of the New York Times, banner headlines about this program, and they identified, I think, like 6 or 8 academic people who the papers report Seymour Hersh alleged had been part of MK Ultra and had been doing drug experiments on subjects without their knowledge, unwittingly, to create amnesias, fugue states, all kinds of horrible things. And West immediately denied it to the papers. He said, I was approached to do it. Of course I wouldn't do something like that. And I never experimented with LSD in humans anyway. They were always animal experiments, which I still don't understand why the papers, he had published papers about LSD experiments with subjects in the 50s. Right. Anyway, he was never investigated. He went on, to a very prominent career. He became one of the chief psychiatric witnesses of the Patty Hearst trial, among other things. And anytime he was accused of being part of MK Ultra, he would deny it, like vehemently, and threaten to sue people. And he died the other weird thing is I interviewed him in I mentioned I did a story on celebrity stalkers. Oh, yeah. He was an expert on the phenomenon of people who became obsessed with celebrities, athletes, movie stars, to the point where they needed to kill them, to feel like they had power over them. So I had been assigned this story by the same woman who gave me this other one years later. to UCLA. I was out in LA interviewing a couple people who had been stalked, stars, and then the family of a couple of the famous people who were killed, like this Rebecca Schaefer, this actress who was killed by her stalker. And I went to UCLA and sat down in Jolly West's office and interviewed him for about an hour. Never even transcribed the interview. I was like, I kept trying to have a dialogue with him, and he was lecturing me like I was in a class in his department. I said, I know, but I want to ask you a question. He goes, no. And then he ended it. I never got to ask him questions. I just thought, what a dick. And it's not mentioned in the story, never transcribed the tape. And then when his name first surfaces, I'm like, oh, I interviewed him. And he denied all this stuff, so he couldn't have done this. I was going to go interview him again, and I saw that he had died, like less than a year before. So I contacted UCLA, and I knew that was the last place he was, and he was there for like 15 years, that was a likely place that he donated his papers to. And they said, yeah, we've had them, but we haven't processed them yet. And it's lots and lots of boxes of documents. And I said, I'm on deadline, it's a magazine story, it's due in like 6 months. Not knowing again, it was gonna be 20 years. And again, persistence pays off. I wore her down, and she said, all right, what we'll do is we'll do a couple boxes a week at a time and release them to you. And I went there for a whole summer, every day, and it was the most tedious work I ever did, because I just felt in my gut that this guy was part of this project, because all the stars lined up. Where he was, even though he denied it, even though he got away with it, I thought there's gonna be some piece of evidence in here. And then one day I found it. I actually didn't know I found it when I found it. It was a couple of letters between him and a guy named Sherman Griffith. And they were outlining these experiments that sounded exactly like the objectives of MK-Ultra in 1953 or 54. And I went home and I go, why does that name Sherman Griffith sound so familiar? And at that point, there were like 3 books about MK-Ultra out. And this was 1999, 2000. And the first one, the most definitive one before Shefflin's, was called The Search for the Manchurian Candidate by John Marks. He was a whistleblower who found the records, contacted Congress, and blew the whole thing out. And in a footnote on a page, he said Sidney Gottlieb, who was a CIA scientist who ran MKUltra from its inception till its supposed end, used the alias sometimes Sherman Griffith. And then I'm like, oh shit, I found the needle in the haystack. And then I went back and I found more and more of these letters that he did not intend to be there, obviously. The amazing thing is, in 2 weeks, I'm speaking at UCLA to the neuroscience and the special archives, because they want me to talk about the process of how I went there and found what I found. I said, but you still have an auditorium named after this like Nazi fascist scientist. And I'm like, am I not going to get killed when I come on campus? And luckily, it's 10 different newer regimes since then, and they really, unless you're setting me up or something, I don't think so. But yeah, that was when your question was something about a moment that.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
Well, Jolly West is one of the most fascinating parts of.
That was it. So I found this, and then the ramifications of this guy, Jolly's, treated Jack Ruby, who shot Oswald, 2 or 3 days after Oswald was arrested for the Kennedy assassination. He eliminated the most important witness in the assassination, who was the accused killer, so he never got to testify or talk. And Jack Ruby was tried in the 6 months later, like January, February of '64, and then was going to testify to the Warren Commission. It was scheduled for, I think, the middle of the summer of '64. About 2 months before, Jolly West was called in to examine Jack Ruby in his jail cell. He was alone with him, and he emerged from the jail cell and had a press conference, said in the preceding 48 hours, Jack Ruby has had a psychotic break from which he'll never recover. He has auditory and visual hallucinations. He hid under the table from people he thought were in the cell with us. He told me they were boiling Jewish children in oil outside the cell at night. You could hear their screams. So he's, he's gone. In West's original letter to Gottlieb, the most important one's 12 pages. It's a bullet point presentation of the objectives. One of his main objectives was how to induce insanity in a subject without their knowledge, either temporary or permanent. So, that kind of ramification, and I had to look into the Kennedy assassination, which I really didn't want to. But I just kept it narrow and looked at his involvement with Ruby, but I'll never forget calling my agent at that point. We're like 3 years in, and he keeps saying, when am I getting the proposal? I go, Sloan, you're not going to believe this. He goes, what? I have to kind of get into the Kennedy assassination. He's like, no. I go, Sloan, shut up. I'll send you some stuff. Just read it. So I'd write these 5-page, they might have even been handwritten, typed letters or emails, no emails at that point. And I would persuade him and go, okay, keep going. So that was one of the most sensational finds I had. That really changed everything.
Yeah, and actually a follow-up to that, because Jolly West also has an interesting, he seems to appear in a lot of things, like, the JFK assassination and Patty Hearst, and they're also, if I'm not mistaken, he was involved in analyzing Sirhan as well.
He never interviewed Sirhan. Believe me, I tried to document it.
Okay.
But he was, strangely, he would have been at that time the authority on why Sirhan was amnesiac. From the minute Sirhan was arrested, he had said, I don't know how I ended up where I ended up. And at a widow's house, and to knock on her door, and I called Linda, the mistress. She's not in my book. I don't have any of that in there. The night before I went, because I wanted to find out if she had ever gotten money from the family. And this is 5 years, it's like last year, it was like 5 years after I'd had lunch with her. And she said, oh yeah, I remember you, and I got the book, and I'm not in it. And she said, I told you I could be in it. And I said, it just didn't belong. She goes, well, don't go to see her tomorrow, Gail. I go, what? How, what? And she said, it's Vince's birthday. Or no, it's her birthday and it's the anniversary of Vince's death. It won't be a good day. And I go, since when are you protecting Gail? Gail had seen her when Vince was a criminal defense attorney. Linda went to one of the trials and she was in the elevator, and then Vince and his wife were getting on, and Gail went after her and just started punching her. She goes, oh, we're best friends now. She said, she had a relationship with my daughter and Vince's daughter. By the time, and she told me this, when she was 12 or 13, Gail finally accepted the fact that he had this other child, and they would actually take care of her when Linda traveled. But she still, she said, Gail still came to my house and begged me to leave him. So anyway, the daughter got Gail, after Vince died, to reach out to Linda. And after I'd had lunch with her, she goes, we talk on the phone once a month, and it's like a PTSD meeting. She talks about the trauma he inflicted on her. I talk about the trauma he inflicted on me, and we support each other. And it would be too painful for you. I'm like, okay, I won't. So then I waited a few months, and I was gonna go again, but this rock and roll guy who lives on the street who's been trying to get me to go, and his name's Josh Klingenhofer. Right now he's in the Pearl Jam. He's a great guy. And he got all involved. He heard me talking on a podcast about wanting to go to Vince's widow. He's like, I'll case it for you. I'll tell you when she's there. We'll start at my house. And I've become really good friends with him. So I called Josh and I said, I'm finally going to go. He goes, oh, you can't go. And I go, why not? And he said, and this is what has never been reported. I don't think anybody knows it. Vince's son killed himself a few months before my second time to go, in the house in front of Gail. And I said, how recently was this? And he says, like a month or two ago. And he said, Wendy, the daughter, had a psychotic break in front of the house on the street. The whole neighbors who came out and watched her taken away. I gotta wait another 6 months or something. So I finally did last spring and went over, and she didn't answer the door. I'm pretty sure she was inside. I left her a note and didn't hear anything. But I do believe I'm gonna talk to Linda, the mistress, when I get back and say, she had made me promise that if I ever went not to tell her, Gail, that I was talking to her. She said our relationship is still new and fragile, but I'm happy to talk to you about her off the record and tell you when's a good time. So I want to find out now whether she thinks I'm going to get Gail to share what I think she knows. I mean, she was at Vince's side through all of this stuff, and she really didn't like him and tried to get away from him. So as a journalist, you can't turn your back on that.